In this video, we go over Azure Privileged Identity Management. Hello everyone, I'm Travis and this is Seraltos. In this video, we're going to configure Privileged Identity Management in Azure. Before we get started, please take a second to subscribe and like if you enjoy these videos. Also, click the bell icon to get notifications of new content. I also want to give a shout out to Azure Flash News for my new favorite coffee mug. If you're not familiar with Azure Flash News, they're one of FeedSpot's top 10 podcasts. Check them out at azureflashnews.com or search for Azure Flash News wherever you get your podcasts. Let's get started by answering the question, what is Privileged Identity Management or PIM? Let me start out with a scenario. An Exchange admin needs to add another domain to Azure AD, so they get added to the global admin role. The role never gets removed, and now the Exchange admin has global admin rights. Or let's say changes are made to a generic account, like the first global admin account or the break glass account, and there's no way to trace it back to the user who made the change. This is privileged identity sprawl, and it's a huge security risk. This is one of the problems that Azure PIM is intended to fix. PIM provides the ability for an admin to enable privilege access only when needed for a limited amount of time. So depending on how it's configured, an admin account won't have admin privileges until it's enabled. Enabling elevated privileges can require MFA, approval from a PIM manager, or a justification for enabling privilege management. PIM provides some common security best practices, including just-in-time access, time-bound access, elevated permission approval, forced MFA, justifications, notifications when privilege roles are activated, and an audit history for privilege role access. PIM provides a review process for tracking who has access to privileged accounts. Also, a way to track when a user elevates their access with PIM. There are a couple things to know before getting started with PIM. This is an Azure AD P2 feature. The Azure AD directory needs enough P2 licenses for privileged role users, approvers, and reviewers. A P2 license is not required for everyone in the directory. I wish it came with P1, but the added benefit of PIM is worth the price of the P2 licenses for those admins who use it. There are a couple terms to understand. There are two role assignment types. A role assignment can be either eligible or active. Eligible means that the roles are available to the user, and the user has to perform one or more action for the role to be activated. An active role assignment means that the user has the role assignment and does not have to perform actions to activate the role. It's always active. This is similar to how it works without PIM, but can still be managed through PIM. So auditing and reviewing still apply. This is a good migration step as you move privileged users from having active roles to making them eligible. There are two versions of PIM, original and updated experience. At the time of this recording, some of the online documentation seems to be a bit mixed. If you have the original version, there's a sign-up process to onboard the tenant. This requires a global admin account to enable. That account will get the privileged role administrator role. That allows the account to manage PIM. I don't have the previous version of PIM and will demonstrate the updated experience. There was no activation or sign up for that to work. I did give privileged role administrator role to a user manually to start using it. I walked through this in the demo. Speaking of demos, here's what I'm going to cover. Onboard a PIM administrator in the updated PIM experience, assign an active role to a user, view PIM alerts, assign an eligible role that is time-bound, activate the eligible role, assign a limited time eligible role, require activation approval on a role, activate an eligible role with approval, and create access reviews. This will make more sense as we go through it. Here I am at the Azure Portal. I'm logged in with an account. I set up that as global admin rights. This account will be used as the PIM administrator. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to All Services and type Privileged. And here is Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. I'll put a star on that. So now it's in my favorites. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here because this is the Start Using PIM dated 3/5/2020, which is just about 10 days ago. And I want to just point this out because as you go through, there's some instructions here. You notice that's green, where over here it's actually purple. And it goes to this page. One of the first things you have to do after going into PIM is consent to PIM. But I had a problem with that because I don't have that. So I don't have anything that looks like that. Also notice up here it says that I'm using the updated Privileged Identity Management experience. And over here it doesn't. So I've been trying to find what the proper way of starting PIM with the new user experience is. And honestly, I haven't found much documentation on it. So what this is supposed to do is once you consent, that gives the account that's logged in the privileged role administrator role. Because right now, I don't have that. And if I look at my roles, there's nothing. If I go into Azure AD Roles, there's really nothing. There's roles listed, but none of them are active or eligible. At this point, it's almost as if consent was ran, but that second part of assigning somebody the rights to admin PIM was missing. So I think Microsoft's documentation may be a little outdated, or maybe I did already consent to this a long time ago and I just don't remember. That could be also. But anyway, let's work through that. Because in the same page, if we come down to configure PIM and grant access to another to manage PIM, let's follow those instructions and see if we can make that work. So I'm going to go to, let's see, Azure AD Roles, and I'm going to add a member for Privileged Role Administration. So I'll go to Azure AD Roles, let's find Privileged Role Administrator, and add a member. We'll select a member. Okay, I know it's blurred out, but trust me, that's the PIM administrator I set up to manage PIM. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to change this to active. Active means that it will always be in place, where eligible means that it can be turned on. So I'll type first PIM admin and save. And add. Okay, so that did it. Next, let's go back to Privileged Identity Management. Let's start with tasks. My roles list all the roles for this account. As you can see, there's nothing under eligible roles. Active roles, there's Global Administrator and Privileged Role Administrator. And again, the difference between active and eligible. Active is just assigned, just like you would do assigning a user to a role. They have that role and they don't need to request to get that enabled. Eligible roles are roles you've assigned to a user that they can request, but by default it's turned off. And then expired roles, well, that would be roles that are expired, and this account doesn't have any. So if we go back to Privileged Identity Management, my request and approve request, these are empty right now, and we'll get back to those later once we add some requests. Review access, if this user was assigned to an access review, those would show up here. And again, we'll get back to this shortly. We're going to work with Azure AD Roles. Azure resources are similar, only scoped at subscriptions and other Azure resources. So next I'm going to go to Azure AD Roles. Everything under tasks is the same as what we just looked at. Let's go to members. Here we can find a member. Let's just find this account. And we'll select. And again, there's no eligible roles, but there isn't a couple active roles and no expired roles. So if you wanted to see what access a specific user had, that could be found under members. Alerts, you can see I have a couple of them. And if you don't have any alerts, you might have to do scan. But here you can see there are too many global administrators. There's a potential stale account. And yep, that is a stale account. It hasn't been used for a while. That's one that I used for a test a while ago. So it's just giving us some information on potential issues. And if we go into settings, you can see the risk levels and if there's any active. Here you can change settings for an alert or disable. There's no settings on this one. So that's what alerts are. I'm going to come back. Go back to Azure AD Roles. We're going to make a user eligible next. So start out at Roles. And I'm going to use Global Admin for this. And I'll select Global Administrator. And I'll add a member. I've got a test account I'm going to use. And here are the two options. So the assignment type is either eligible or active. Eligible means the account can request the role assignment, but by default it's off until they enable it and turn it on. Active means that it's just active. This behaves similar to how assigning somebody a role in Azure AD would work without PIM. Only you can select permanent or set it by a time. But for this, we're going to go eligible. And again, even with eligible, you can set a deadline or an end time and a start time. But I'm going to leave that permanently eligible and save. And then add. The time-bound option is good if somebody is part of a project, maybe temporarily, or maybe you have a consultant coming in and helping with something. You can set an end date, so you don't have to worry about that user having a privileged identity for a long period of time. Okay, so let's see how this works. I'm going to open up an incognito window. We'll go to portal.azure.com and sign in as that test user. And this user has MFA enabled already. So I'll approve that on the Authenticator app. So by default, this user is not an admin. So if I try to go into Active Directory and do something like add a user, you can see I don't have permission to do that. So I'm going to hop back to all services and type in PIM. And here under my roles, now remember I'm logged in as that test account. So it tells me that I have an eligible role, and that is a global administrator. So if I click activate, I can see some details. It gives me a start time and a duration. I can change the duration if I don't need it for the full 8 hours. So I could go down to 1.5, and then it's going to ask for a reason. And activate. This will take a couple seconds to activate. I should add that the entire time I'm doing this, when I make a user eligible or when I'm activating this role assignment, I'm getting emails the entire time that this is going on, which I think is a pretty good thing. So as an administrator, I can know what changes are being made in the tenant. So I'm going to sign out and sign back in. Now if I go to Azure Active Directory, go to Users, you can see I can now create a new user. I'm not going to do that, but this shows how a normal user can temporarily elevate their rights to a role that we've granted them through PIM, just long enough to make changes, and then after a given amount of time, that role assignment is disabled until it's requested again. Okay, so that worked pretty good. Let's go back, and I want to create a new role assignment. This time for the Exchange admin. So I'm going to go to Exchange Service Administrator, and I'm going to add a member. I'll add that same account, the Test1 account. I'm going to leave the assignment type as eligible, and I'm going to disable the permanent eligibility. We'll change this to, let's see, we'll do this year, and we'll put it out 1 day. So this user will only be eligible for the Exchange Service Administrator for 1 day. And then add. And I'm going to make one other change. I'm going to go to Role Settings. And here you can see a list of all the settings. I'm going to edit. So I can change the duration. It's by default it's 8 hours, but I can change that to anything more or less that I want within a certain amount of time. I'll leave it at 8. I'm going to require justification on activation. I won't require the ticket information and require approval to activate. So this is different. I'm going to require another user to approve any request. Remember last time the user requested the elevated permission and it was granted. This time there's going to be an additional step in the workflow where the user will request and then somebody has to approve it before it's granted. And I have 2 members in here. I'm just going to remove both and add that PIM. There we go. That's the PIM admin. We can go into assignments. So here we can change some of the settings. And again, this is changing the role settings for the Exchange Service Administrator. Not just that user, but any user who's assigned to this role will have to follow these steps. So again, this isn't specific to the user, it's specific to the role. Next, we'll go into notifications, and here you can change notification settings. There's quite a variety of stuff to add or modify. You can add additional recipients and then quiet it down if you want to, but I'm going to leave it as is. And then let's update. And if we clear out this EX here, and we look at all the roles, I also want to point out that we can click on active, and we can see we have 6 global admins and 1 privileged role administrator. And then under eligible, you can sort that way as well. So if you want to see how many people are attached to each role type, you can get a quick look at that here by sorting. Okay, so now our user is eligible for the Exchange admin role, but an approval needs to be done. So let's go back and log in as that user. Again, I'm using incognito mode. And I'll approve the sign-in request. I'm going to go back and look for PIM. I can look at my roles. Here I can see my Exchange Service Administrator. There's an end time assigned. I can activate, and I have the option to extend. And I can add a reason there. That's a request to extend. Okay, I'm going to activate now. And I'll add a reason and activate. So it went to pending for approval. Now if I go back to Privileged Identity Management, I should be able to see that in my request. There it is, it's waiting for approval. Let's go back to the portal signed in as the PIM administrator. Here we are back at the portal as the PIM administrator. And if we go into my requests, there's nothing. But if we go into approve requests, there's a section for requests to renew or extend role assignments, and another one to request role activation. And here you can see the activation request that the other user submitted. If I click on that, I can type in a justification and approve. I also have the option to deny, but I'll approve. So the update was sent. Now if I go back to the test 1 user account from Privileged Identity Management, if I go to my requests, the request is gone. If I go to my roles and click on activate, it tells me the role assignment already exists. So that indicates that I already have this role assignment and I'm good to go. And in the background, there is also emails that go back and forth. So the user would have been notified that the activation was approved. So that's the basic of role assignments, how to assign roles, how to approve roles, how to modify the role so it requires approval. Let's go back to Privileged Identity Management and then go into Azure AD Roles and go to Access Reviews. We're going to create a couple access reviews. So the first one, we'll call this Global Admin. I'll give it a description. There's a start date. You can also set the frequency if you wanted to do it weekly, monthly, quarterly. I'm going to do one time, but weekly or monthly would probably be a better option in production. So this review process could happen on a regular basis. If you do select weekly, you can select the duration in days. That's the duration the review will hang out there. And there's also an end by date. Let's change that back to one time. This one-time review will end on the 22nd. So it's going to scope to everyone. That's the only option. And here I'm going to pick the role. You can pick one or multiple. I'm just going to pick the global admin role. Under the reviewers, you can select a user or leave it as member self. That's a self review where the users could indicate if they still need the role assignment or not. I'm going to select the users though. And I'll select that PIM admin account again. I'm going to leave the rest as default and click Start. Let's click out and click back on. There's no refresh button. So here's the access review we just created. Really, we're not getting a lot of information yet. So let's go back to Privileged Identity Management. And here under Tasks, so again, this is relevant to the user logged in, we're going to review access. And if it doesn't show up right away, you might have to click off and click back on. So I'm going to go in. So this is a global admin access review. So what I did is I selected the test1 user 1 account. Trust me, that's it. And I can deny it right now, or I can put in a reason and I could approve it. I'm actually going to deny this account. So now that account's gone out of the list. I'm going to select the rest and just put in still in use. Notice I have to supply a reason to approve but not to deny. That is configurable. So I'm going to approve those. So now this review is finished. I'll go back to Privileged Identity Management, go into Azure AD, Access Reviews. And here we can see some details now. We've got 1 denied and 5 approved. We can see the reviewers, the settings. Let's create another one. This time I'm going to do something a little different. Because if we go back to, let's see here, we go back to roles, and we go to global admins, we can see that test1 user 1 is still part of the eligible roles. So although I denied that, it's still there. So I can remove them, and I'm going to do that now. That user doesn't need to be a part of the global admin anymore. So now that user's gone. Let's go back to, we'll go back to access reviews. I'm going to create another one, and we'll call this Exchange Admin. Again, we'll leave it 1 time. Leave everything there. Select Exchange Service Administrators. And I'll set the reviewers as the PIM account. Just like before so far, except upon completion, I'm going to apply results. Also notice that if the reviewers don't respond, we have the action to make no changes, remove access, approve access, or take recommendations. There's also advanced settings where we can show recommendations. I'm going to enable that. And then require reason on approval, mail notifications, and reminders. So once that's all set, I'll click Start. Now that it's done, I'll go back to Review Access. And again, this could just take it a little bit. There's no refresh button, so if you click off and click back on, there it is. It just takes a couple minutes to run. Now let's go in. I only have the test1 user 1 account listed in the Exchange admin, so I know that that's what this account is. If you look under recommendations, now it says approve. It says that this user has logged in once in the last 30 days. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to deny. So now this user's denied access. If we go back into Azure AD Roles, go to Access Reviews, Exchange Admin. Here we are at the Access Review. You can see that the one user is denied. I'm going to stop it. We'll click Yes. We can also see results, reviewers, the settings that were used for this review. Now let's go back to Privileged Identity Management. We'll go to Azure AD Roles and look at roles. Be sure to refresh, and this could take a couple seconds to work its way through. But now if we go to Exchange Service Administrator, you can see that there's nobody in the eligible role, active role, or expired roles. So when we denied that user through the access review and then closed out that review, that kicked off the process to actually remove that role from the user. That does it for this demo. That's the basics of using Privileged Identity Management in Azure. That does it for the video. I hope you found this information helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and click the bell icon for new content. Thanks for watching.